Good morning, football fans. Welcome to a Monday episode of the Call Sheet Daily podcast here at the Fans First Sports Network. I'm your host, Kevin Smith. Happy to bring you another week of shows. And boy, there's a lot to talk about with the NFL draft in the books. We're going to have some great guests on the program this week. We're going to hit on a variety of topics. A lot of draft related talk out there. And as I was planning my shows this week over the weekend, I was thinking a lot about the angle I wanted to take. You could probably go to a million different places and find people doing their top 5 favorites, least favorites, winners, losers, best draft, worst draft, all that stuff. And I think there's a lot of value in those conversations. But I want to take a little bit of a different angle. So today and tomorrow, we're going to look at two things that to me stood out about the draft. And today, our focus will be on the Shedeur Sanders fiasco, but specifically on how that entire drama and the way that it went down is really a reflection of contemporary America. That was a very modern issue. I was searching for a word there, issue, because I don't even know what to call it. On one hand, it was sort of a debacle. I saw people call it a tragedy. Come on, man. That's not a tragedy. But it certainly was an episode that made us all stop and pay attention for one reason or another. Some people were disgusted by it. Some people felt that it was sort of a tragic comedy in a way. But I do think that it's an important issue. And so we'll jump into that today. And then tomorrow, my guest on the program is going to be Ken Wisniewski, CEO here at the Fans First Network. And we're going to talk about value in the NFL draft. How do you determine value? Because really what the NFL draft is an investment in resources. And you're trying to get the greatest value you can for that investment. And Ken has built multiple highly successful businesses, including Fans First. And he knows a thing or two about investment and the risk reward that goes with that. So we'll talk about the draft. But to Shedeur, a reflection of contemporary America. We can all speculate as to why a guy who was expected to be chosen in the first round, and some people even projected him to be chosen within the first 10 picks of that first round, lasted until pick number 144 of the 5th round. A lot of speculation about that. I wasn't in on the draft meetings. I don't know anything. I don't have any inside information that I could offer that you can't get elsewhere. I've heard the same stories you've heard. There are multiple reactions to this. There are those who are outraged, the Stephen A. Smiths and the Mel Kipers of the world, who are insinuating that there is some sort of vendetta against the Sanders family, or perhaps there's some sort of racism or collusion involved here. There are those who feel on the complete opposite end of the spectrum that Shedeur Sanders just wasn't that good to justify a first-round pick on, and then he compounded the problem by going through the interview process with these 32 NFL teams in an arrogant and entitled manner, and that ultimately teams decided that if he wasn't going to be their starter, he wasn't worth the headache. And I don't know where the truth is. Usually the truth is somewhere in between. But I do know this. The Shedeur Sanders story really kind of rolls together, encapsulates a lot of facets of contemporary America that are worth noting. And I'm not going to put a judgment on them. I'm not going to say, oh, it's good or it's bad. I'm not going to be the old man shaking his fist at the clouds. Get off my lawn. I'm not saying just because it's contemporary, it was better back then. It's just different. So what are some of those facets that we saw play out? Well, one, I really think that what you see in the Shedeur Sanders story is an example of the power that college players now have and the conflict that sometimes giving them so much power at the college level can create when they get to the NFL. In college today, with NIL money and the transfer portal, college players have so much power, especially the ones who are really good, have so much power now to dictate the terms of their college situation. Shedeur Sanders started at Jackson State. He then went to Colorado. He got paid a lot of NIL money. He used the transfer portal smartly to better his situation, to raise his draft profile. He's one of many, dozens, maybe even hundreds of college players who now participate in this process. And if they commit to someplace initially and that situation no longer works for them, they have tremendous options as to where to go next. And we're seeing it over and over again, these players using the portal to improve their situation. Jackson Dart did it. Will Howard did it. Quinshon Judkins did it. Caleb Downs did it. I can go on and on and on and on. And it's, hey, good for them, man. Good for them. Because if you commit to a situation and that situation turns out to be bad for you, the old alternative was that you really kind of had to suck it up. The new reality is you've got options. And with NIL money, you can get paid. But what is the consequence of that? The negative consequence of that? The negative consequence of that is that when you leave that situation and you go to the NFL, you are now in the opposite predicament. You're in a situation where you get drafted and essentially assigned to a team that unless they cut you, you're anchored there for the next 4 years, or maybe even 5 if you're a first round pick, or maybe even 6 years if you're a first round pick who gets franchised. They've got you under their control. And because NFL coaches are exceptionally power oriented for good reason, their livelihood is on the line. They know that they may only get one shot at being an NFL head coach or coaching at a high level in the NFL. And they're not going to yield the power and the authority because they don't want to put their future in the hands of somebody else, much less a 21, 22-year-old kid just coming into the league. So college players go from having almost all the power now to having very little power. And that is a very difficult transition for some. And Shedeur Sanders, I think, showed us how difficult that transition can be because, and again, I don't know exactly what's true, but you read the same report over and over again from credible sources, and you begin to feel as though, hey, there could be some legitimacy here. It feels as though he went into the interview process and did not project himself with sufficient humility or with an attitude that suggested he was ready to roll up his sleeves and get down to work and do whatever the coaching staff wanted him to do. And that hurt him. This is also a story about parental involvement. And I've talked a little bit in the past on this podcast about dealing with parents. 30 years as a high school coach, 14 years as a head coach. I can say this. Overwhelmingly, my experience dealing with parents was positive. Overwhelmingly, parents were supportive. Parents wanted the best for their kids, but they also recognized that they didn't know it all and they trusted you to make good decisions. And oftentimes, if they didn't like what was going on with their kid, they would find a respectful way to deal with that. However, for those who chose another route, who wanted to micromanage their son, who wanted to dictate the terms of their son's involvement in your program, they were exceptionally vocal, they were exceptionally aggressive, and they were exceptionally hard to deal with. And I've said it before, and I will repeat it because I believe it. The most difficult parents to deal with were quarterback dads, the dads of quarterbacks, because it's the highest profile position on the field. It is the one that comes with the most responsibility and potential glory. It is the one that many football parents grow up dreaming their son will play. I want my kid to be the quarterback. And you spend so much time now paying for personalized training and committing resources to your son's future at that position that when it doesn't go the way you want it, for some parents, that is unacceptable. And what happened with Deion Sanders and his son is fascinating because Deion Sanders coached his son through every part of the process, high school, college, at both Jackson State and Colorado. And he manipulated the offense in ways that he felt would be most beneficial to his son. And he created a situation that he believed would allow his son to have the best path to the NFL. And that situation wasn't necessarily conducive to his son's success in the NFL, meaning the offense created for Shedeur Sanders, while it allowed him to have a really high completion percentage and do some things well on the field, didn't always translate to what an NFL offense looks like. And so the idea that, hey, man, maybe the situation that this father created for his kid won't translate well to what an NFL offense looks like. And because this father is exceptionally high profile and has said publicly things like, if we don't like who drafts him, we might pull a Manning, referencing when Eli Manning publicly refused to go play for the San Diego Chargers. When the Manning family made it known that if the Chargers draft Eli, we're not going there. We're not playing there. That NFL teams thought, I just don't know if his talent is worth that headache. I felt like when I was listening to a lot of the comments being made about Deion Sanders in this process, I felt like they were talking about stuff that I dealt with high school parents. It was crazy. I'm like, this is the NFL, and these are the problems I have dealt with. You also have this. This is a very contemporary story too because of celebrity culture and the involvement of social media. So much of Shedeur Sanders' rise to fame has been because of the brand, the Sanders name, how they market that name, how they have used social media and his profile to create, in essence, a celebrity. Shedeur Sanders was as much a celebrity as he was a football player. He was a personality and a persona carefully cultivated by his father, honed on social media, put out there for millions of people to follow and consume. When you look at what he did on draft night, he built a draft room for himself and threw a massive party. I don't begrudge him that. Celebrate however you want, man. That's on you. You know, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Throw the best party you can throw if you want to do that. But the fact that they had film crews there and that it was so carefully orchestrated so that it could be broadcast out on social media in a way that would enhance his brand is very contemporary. That is very modern America. And there are consequences to that. One of those consequences was seen when the son of Atlanta Falcons defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich found Shedeur Sanders' private number on his father's open laptop and staged a now very famous prank phone call that was also beamed out on social media. It was a made for social media moment. Let's prank call Shedeur and then put it on social media because that will raise our brand and our profile, even though they did it anonymously. They wanted the clicks. Ask yourself, they might have done it even without the social media, but in this current environment, there's no way they wouldn't put it on social media. And that was embarrassing and pathetic. But it's all part of this bigger story about making all of this public. It's all for public consumption. It's all about entertainment. And at the end of the day, when you go to the NFL, the NIL money doesn't matter anymore. The transfer portal's not a thing. Your dad doesn't carry any weight, even if he's Deion Sanders. And your social media involvement more than likely can only hurt you. It's a different world. You are going into a league of grown men whose livelihoods are on the line. They are dependent upon you, especially if you're going to be the quarterback, to help them put food on their table and build a life for their families. And when I say put food on their table, I don't mean literally. These guys are making millions of dollars, but they're trying to set up their family for both the type of wealth that will allow you to live comfortably now and then generational wealth if they could potentially be a star. And if you're a coach, you're reliant upon that player, again, particularly if he's a quarterback, for your future employment. The marriage between coaches and quarterbacks are one of the biggest determinants of career success. If you're a head coach and you can't find a franchise quarterback, you're probably going to get fired. So when Shedeur Sanders goes around the league and interviews with all these head coaches and all these coaching staffs, if he is not on point with those interviews, and if he doesn't convince them, like, I can invest my livelihood in this guy, they're not going to take him. The story of what perhaps, and again, I'll say perhaps because I don't know, but you read enough of these stories and you begin to get a feel for maybe this is kind of how it went down. But the story of the interview that occurred between Brian Daboll, the New York Giants, and Shedeur Sanders seems very telling. That Brian Daboll, the Giants are drafting 3rd overall, and they are considering taking Shedeur Sanders 3rd overall. Or if not 3rd, then at least trading back up into the back end of the 1st round to acquire him, like they did with Jackson Dart ultimately. And that Brian Daboll sent Shedeur Sanders an install, which is essentially a package of plays that the Giants might put in early on in their mini camp, and said, I want to go over this with you. And that when Shedeur Sanders showed up for the interview, he was not prepared at all to go through that install. That he evidently had not done his homework. And that Brian Daboll was not thrilled by this, and that Shedeur Sanders was not thrilled that Brian Daboll, I don't want to say came at him, because again, I don't know how it went down, but that it didn't go as smoothly as Shedeur Sanders would have liked. At the end of the day, Brian Daboll's got to win games this year. I mean, the Giants won 5 games last year. If he doesn't have a successful season this year, he might get fired. And they need a long-term quarterback. Their quarterbacks right now are Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. Nobody thinks that is a long-term solution. They're drafting their future quarterback. And if Brian Daboll is going to be their coach for the foreseeable future, that guy has to work out. And ultimately, they decided Jackson Dart was the better investment. Why? Because the film separation between Shedeur Sanders and Jackson Dart, and then ultimately all the other guys who got drafted before him, like Tyler Shuck and Jalen Milroe and even Dylan Gabriel, the film separation between Shedeur Sanders and those guys was not great enough for them to be comfortable with Shedeur Sanders' approach and then everything else that came with it. The NFL is a different animal. And the fact that this Shedeur Sanders story is so contemporary and involves so much more than just football appears to have been very off-putting to a lot of the teams in the league. So, where will this go? I don't know, man. I'll be honest. I'm rooting for the guy. I like a good redemption story. I hope, this is my hope for Shedeur Sanders. I hope that he is humbled by this or if not humbled, that at least he decides that rather than be a victim here, or rather than just simply double down on the brand, he just kind of goes dark for a while and rolls up his sleeves and gets to work and says, I'm going to prove everybody wrong. And from there, wherever it goes from there, that's on him. But I'm rooting for redemption. All right. That is our Monday episode of the Call Sheet. Join me tomorrow where we kind of round out our draft coverage by talking about value. What does value mean in the NFL? These are investments. How do you get great value out of an investment? What teams may have done so? My guest will be Ken Wisniewski, the CEO here at Fans First. Going to be a great conversation. Until then, have a great Monday, everybody. Take care.